Good morning and welcome to ETX Covered. I'm David Littman. If all goes according to plan, the first Texans only have to wait one more week before they can start taking vaccines for COVID-19. Governor Greg Abbott announced this week that Texas will receive an initial shipment of 1.4 million doses of Pfizer's vaccine and that it should arrive the week of the 14th. Well, that's just the first of many planned shipments. Nationwide, 40 million doses should be available by the end of the year. That's enough for 20 million people. And the first recipients will be healthcare workers and nursing home residents. The next phase will continue into the spring, and the CDC says it should include essential workers, seniors, and adults with high-risk medical conditions. Everyone else will be able to get their shots by the summer. Moderna and Pfizer have shown great success based on their clinical trials, a process that's highly scrutinized and often secretive. So to shed a little light on what happens during a clinical trial like those, we welcome Dr. Suman Sinha, a pulmonologist from CHRISTUS Health. Good morning. Thanks so much for being with us today.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
First, generally speaking, how is a doctor or hospital picked to take part in a clinical trial?
Great question. The clinical trials are published on a federal database, and we have a large research team here at CHRISTUS that actually surveys the trials and can sometimes present them to certain physicians that have a specialty interest in a certain area. For example, if there was a pacemaker trial and they presented that trial to a cardiologist who implants pacemakers, that might be a good fit where the trial is introduced to a physician and then the physician can decide whether that's something that they would like to study.
Is it really competitive to get picked to run a trial?
I think it is competitive to get picked. The competition primarily has to do with the fact that many organizations like to be on the cutting edge of research. And so there are incentives for faculty to want to participate. In the instance of COVID, there is so much research going on at the time. And I think that the competition is there, but perhaps not as great as it has been in the past due to the numerous number of clinical trials that are currently underway.
You've been involved in clinical trials, not for a vaccine, but for treatments of COVID-19. So have you felt any extra pressure to do the work quickly just because of the global importance of this virus?
Without a doubt. We are definitely burning the candle at both ends to do the best we can clinically to care for our patients, but also to participate at whatever level we possibly can to look for solutions to this great problem. And again, it's unprecedented how quickly some of these clinical trials have been implemented by our organization and how quickly I think we've moved towards some real solutions that are just around the corner.
So how do you, either personally or doctors in general, balance that desire for a quick result, given the intensity of the fight against the coronavirus, with the safety requirements that you know you need both to make sure the trial's valid and to protect your patients?
Very, very good question. Remember, David, that there are drugs that are already in use for other diseases that we have started to use for COVID-19 with good effect. For example, we use a corticosteroid called Decadron that has been shown in large studies to impart benefit to the patients. We had already been using this medication for many other things, and so we knew that it was a relatively safe drug when used properly. So, that's one aspect of it. And then, of course, there are the investigational new drugs that really have not been used in humans before. And, thanks to how quickly our government and FDA, our National Institutes of Health have worked on getting some of these drugs to trial much sooner, it's just incredible how fast and how much progress has been made.
So when you look at these vaccine trials with Pfizer and Moderna being so close to getting final approval, what's the aspect of this that stands out the most to you?
I think this is very encouraging. And I say that because those of us trained in traditional medicine understand the tremendous importance to vaccines and preventing and essentially wiping out diseases. You know, the obvious examples are things like polio and smallpox. So, you know, those are stories and diseases that may be understood by families in our own community at a personal level. I can tell you that my father-in-law himself had polio as a young man, and had it not been for the tremendous speed at which the vaccine was developed, I think it would have been something that decimated a greater portion of our population. So with that in mind, watching how quickly we've been able to implement studies for COVID vaccine development is very, very encouraging at this point. We have the context of SARS-1 and the MERS disease, and vaccines were starting to be developed for those conditions. And fortunately, those diseases ran their course. And so the vaccine trials for those conditions were not necessary to be completed. But that gave us a running start on the current situation. I think the ongoing support from our hospital systems, our clinics, and from our communities, meaning our patients, in participating responsibly in clinical trials is a very important aspect of how we handle this current COVID crisis. I have to commend the folks in administration here in our health system at CHRISTUS. I have to commend our research team, and I have to commend our doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists for the tremendous effort that they have put in implementing these clinical trials to move towards solutions that will really work for our population. We anticipate that a vaccine will be available soon, and these vaccines have been vetted very, very vigorously in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials at this point, and will possibly be looked at in phase 4 trials for confirmation of their therapeutic benefits. And I would like to help people understand that a vaccine will not be brought to us for use unless it's been vetted and it is deemed to be safe and effective for the people that are receiving it.
There are a handful of high-profile trials for vaccines and treatments, but probably a lot that we never hear about. So what are the other types of trials that doctors are working on?
Sure. So when we look at a disease as complex as COVID-19, coronavirus, we know that there are so many different aspects to treating a patient. And so the development of processes and studies to study drugs addresses the many different arms of the armamentarium that we need in order to treat this disease properly. For example, we mentioned anti-inflammatory medications. We are using Decadron for that. We know that the patients have what we call prothrombosis, or blood clotting states within their body that are leading to problems. And so we're using medications for that as well. When we talk about source control, which is actually controlling the virus itself, that's where vaccines and monoclonal antibodies will be used, along with antiviral agents such as remdesivir. So many of these different aspects of or different phases of the treatment plan are being studied and are already being implemented for patients to go after the various different aspects of how the disease actually causes problems in the human body.
Is it hard to get patients to sign up for a trial for COVID-19?
That's an excellent question, David. And I don't think it's hard. What I've noticed when we started one of the phase 2 trials that we recently completed here was that the patients themselves were tremendously willing to contribute and to help with a problem that they know to be a very, very great problem for this community. And their willingness to participate was something that was just very touching to the heart. That and many of the folks that we discussed this with, I would say they didn't even bat an eye when they understood what was being asked of them.
I know you're hoping to start work on another COVID-19 clinical trial fairly soon. What will that one focus on?
The previous one was looking more at an inflammatory cascade. And the subsequent trial that we're looking at also is dealing with an inflammatory cascade. So inflammatory cascade means how do we curb the body's response to the virus so that it doesn't overshoot it and damage its own organs. So the drug that we'll be looking at in this upcoming trial would be doing just that at what we call a phase 3 level, which is where we compare it to placebo or compare it to other drugs of a similar class.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be with you, and let us know if there's anything else you need.